Hello everyone, how are you today? My name is Piotr Pasich, and last week I have shared a couple of links with you to show you really basics and fundamental things about the blockchain. And if you didn't read that, that's totally okay. This video is especially for you, and if you did read this, it's a kind of a summary of the information that you have already learned. And today's goal is to give you a quick introduction to how the Bitcoin or the basic blockchain technology works and explain you a little bit about itself. But before we learn how it works, we need to why it works. And this story starts maybe 20 years ago. When an individual guy called They Die, inspired by Tim May's crypto anarchy white papers, declared that he would like to see some other financial system that solves a lot of problems he faced, because those times in 1998 they have a lot of troubles with bank trust, and believe me, those troubles of bank trust still exist. Because let me give you a couple of examples. Like the Greece a couple of years ago had a pretty huge trouble. They actually still have a pretty huge trouble with the money, and they limited the amount of money which you can get each day to the 100 or 200 euros. Just imagine this kind of the situation when you actually have some savings on your account, or you receive a salary to your bank account and you cannot get it because your country, your government is poor and they have not enough money to give them to the citizens, so they need to limit the amount of money you can get from your own bank account. So that are your own money for every day. So does it mean those money you have on your own bank account are actually yours or not? There is the first thing, but that's about the Greece. Let's talk about my money. A couple of years ago, I was traveling a lot, and I have informed my bank that I will travel a lot, but it still happened to me. I was on the airport in Katowice. I spent some money on the airport. Then I have flight to the Moscow. I bought a couple of things in Moscow airport, and then I traveled to Armenia and decided to take some money from the ATM, and I couldn't, because they decided that my credit card was probably stolen, so they should block it. I called a bank. I rang a bank and asked if they can unlock my account. So they did it really immediately after a couple of minutes of explanation, but they couldn't do the same thing. They couldn't unlock my credit card because it was already reported as stolen. So I had to go back to the Poland. That was an ideal situation from their point of view. I had to go back to the office and take a new credit card, which was pretty impossible because I was already in Armenia. So I had to somehow hack the system and transfer the money from my account to my friend's account, and he was able to take the money from ATM for myself, because they just blocked my own money. The another example is when I ordered the vignette for the highway in Austria a couple of weeks ago, and they have this pretty good regulations in the legal agreement that you need to order and make a pay for the vignette at least 2 weeks before the starting date of the vignette, because for the next 2 weeks after you pay, if you pay with a credit card, you are able to cancel the transfer. So just imagine that you are, I don't know, an e-commerce shop that get the transfer that allows user to pay with the credit card, and every user, after you send them your products, can cancel the transfer. Stupid, isn't it? You get the money and then you don't have the money. So if you have a transfer, can you really trust that? And Veidan really would like to solve this problem with a new currency system, payment system. He called it B-money. And remember, that was 1998 when the internet was pretty slow. Everybody needed to have a modem to connect with the internet. So everything was pretty young. Any idea of the application that handled all this system were pretty young. Not all the banks, maybe not even any bank, had an internet website that allowed you to make a transfer from the internet. So that was a pretty fresh idea of how to handle the money. But he didn't create any system for the B-money, but only wrote a couple of rules that he would like to see with an ideal financial system that he imagined. So in his words, the money are handled by the money owner, and the system is the money owner actually own the system, not a bank, not an organization, not the government. Nobody can take your money. If you are the owner of the money, you have a full control of them. The other stuff is if you own the money, you need to spread any information about those money with the others. So you wouldn't like to spread anything else than an information from what kind of what account the money are sent from, to which account and how much. You don't want to put any other information like your local address, like your address or your name, spread it around the world. Just imagine how it works right now with the banks. If you buy something in the internet and you send a direct bank transfer to the others, you send with this specific bank transfer all of your information. The receiver will know your first name, the surname, your address. That is stupid. Why the receiver needs to know my address? So the bank basically sells your information, your personal information, for nothing. And he would also, Veidan would also to keep this network, not the network, the financial system anonymous. So no confidential information should be kept in the system. He would like to also keep the fee really low to make it possible to do really small transfers with a small amount of money across the world. Because now if I from Poland would like to send some small amount of money to USA, I will pay an enormous fee to the banks, because they will have to take own fee. There is 2 or 3 systems in the middle between them and the US bank, an example American bank, and they all need to be paid, and I need to pay that. So if I would like to send $1, I need to actually spend for this little transfer $10, because $9 is the fee I need to pay for that. So he would like to avoid this kind of the fee and limit it as probably to 0. It's an ideal word, to 0. And of course, everything needs to be transparent because it's across the world. So that's another thing why it needs to be anonymous. And this idea stayed frozen for the next decade, for the next 10 years, because in 2008, late 2008, something like October, December, something like that, an individual or an organization, we don't really know who he is or what it is exactly, is called Satoshi Nakamoto, published a white paper that called this system, described a system of the Bitcoin, a decentralized network that every participant can can participate into, and were able to transfer money from one point to the another. This is free that was free for the very beginning. This is still free. You can join the networks, you can join the Bitcoin freely, but at the very beginning the computation power was not so sophisticated, so you were able to join the network and get the reward from the network really fast. But nobody really knew about the network at the very beginning, except for the really nerdy freaks. That paper solved a couple of things, like the anonymity. He decided to stick only to the numbers and do not share any kind of the information through the network. Availability, he proposed a kind of the reward for everybody who was connected to the network and wanted to spend real computation power and electricity share with the others. So if you share a lot of computation power with the network, you will be rewarded with each block. At the very beginning it was 50 bitcoins. After a couple of years it was limited to 25 bitcoins. Right now it's 12.5 bitcoin, which is $125,000 right now. It was distributed every 10 minutes. So that's exactly why a lot of people would like to put all the computation power to the blockchain to calculate the blocks and to mine the blocks. I will explain what does it really mean to mine the block in a minute. And the last thing is to how to secure the network, and he decided to stick to the cryptography. And every block is cryptographically secured, and I will show you how and explain in a minute. So that's a little bit about the historical overview, why they did it. They were not really happy about how the financial system worked in the real world. So in the real world, so they decided to create own internet system that handles the financial. And if you would like to know how it works, we can start from the transaction. And the transaction can be described on a piece of paper. We can describe it with a couple of things, like in the real world. Like the name, we already told that bank transfer in the real world spread an information like your name, your address, sender's account address, receiver's account address, amount of the money, the fiat currency that you would like to send, and the title of transaction. In the Bitcoin world, which is a pretty first implementation of the blockchain, you get rid of a half of those information because they really give information on who you are. If you leave only the numbers, I would like to send some kind of the amount, some amount of the money from the sender's account to the receiver's account, and you can sign it with your private key, which works like your password to your bank account in the internet website. You didn't spread any kind of the confidential information across the world. Those are just random numbers, and even if anybody else can see this transaction in the ledger, then they cannot say if it is yours transaction or not. You might ask, how do you know that somebody sent you money? You basically can receive the receiver's account dedicated for the sender. So the receiver's account will be a unique account number dedicated only for this one transaction or only for this one sender, and you can have as many accounts as you would like to create. So you can have only one account, or you can have a couple of thousands accounts, and it doesn't really matter. So that's how you handle a lot of transfers from a lot of senders on the internet payment system. And now if we have this kind of the information written down on the sticky note. We can call it a transaction. So we define this transaction with a simple sentence. We send some amount of money from one account to the another, and now let's put it on a piece of paper. Every other people can spread an information about the transactions around the world and publish it to the blockchain or to the network. But just imagine that there is hundreds or thousands or billions of transactions that are sent or published to the network, and there is really a chaos. So all of those transactions are really moved to the piece of paper. They are sticked with the glue to the piece of paper by one miner or one node or one seeder. There are a couple of names you can you can use for this kind of the system that really sticks those papers and those sticky notes to the piece of paper, and the miner decides which transactions will be stick to this paper. It is really important to choose the right transactions, because the Bitcoin rewards for the miners by the Bitcoins on which transactions were sticked to the paper. This paper with the transactions, if they are spread, published around the web network, it is called a block, this piece of paper. And the numbers of the zeros are the hardest thing to calculate in the blockchain, because if you add a piece of paper, you need to calculate the hash number of the block based on the previous block number and the included transactions, and the calculations, the result of the calculations, and if you can publish this piece of paper to the blockchain, depend on the number of the amount of the numbers on the very beginning of the hash calculated from the block. If the block needs to be, if you will have to have more calculation power to calculate the block, you will need to calculate the block hash number with more zeros at the beginning. And that's the really hard stuff to do, because just imagine you take 2000 transactions, include them into the block, and calculate the hash. It doesn't match. You get rid, run one transaction, add another one, and recalculate. Get rid of one transaction, add another one, and recalculate. And you do it a couple of thousand of times per second, or a couple of billion of times per second, this operation. And even with that, it takes you 10 minutes to calculate all of those things. And if it takes you less than 10 minutes, during the next block or next couple of blocks, you will need to do the hardest stuff, because you will need to add one more zero at the beginning. And if it will take you more than 10 minutes, it means you have not got enough computation power to handle this kind of the job. So during the next block, you will have to compute the hash number with 1 zero less at the beginning. So that is called mining. And if you are the fastest miner in the network, you can publish the information about your mined block, and you will be rewarded with the bitcoins for that. But you as a miner decide which transactions exactly are included into the block. So when you have when you are the fastest, because your computation power is really sophisticated, and you have really mining platform to handle this kind of the computation, you have prepared your block, your piece of paper. You can publish it, and put it on the ledger, and it looks like that. The ledger can be described, in my opinion, just as a stack of pieces of paper put one over another. So if we will get another block and would like to publish that, we just put it on the top of the previous one, which is calculated from the hash number of the very previous block number. And it has own transactions. So every transaction is described and stick to this block. And what are actually the nodes? The nodes are installed piece of software on the seeds, and the blockchain network is distributed into peer-to-peer network. It means it hasn't got any central point of entry or central server or any organization that can take responsibility or manage the network. Every node is on the same level as every another node. So if you will install a piece of software that will handle the Bitcoin protocol, you are able to communicate with any other node on the same rules, and nobody is more important than anybody else. And you might ask how they discover which nodes are in the network, because if you have a central point or the central server, you know that in example with the HTTP protocol, one server has one domain and you can hit that. You know where it is. The domain is assigned to the IP address. But in this example, if you add new node, you don't know anything about the network. So at the very first point, the node tries to find any other node in the saved database, because if you have already talked to any other nodes, you probably know where they are, so there's IP addresses. So you can save it to the database and communicate with them directly, like that. But if you do not have this address, you just send a guy who walks over the internet and looks for the DNS addresses or the DNS records that says where any other nodes stay. And when you find any other node, you add it to your database records and communicate with that directly. It might happen that there are no information in your local IP database or in the DNS around the internet. So every node has like a hard-coded database of addresses, array of the addresses to the bitcoin.org or bitcoin.com, and those addresses are we need to assume that those addresses will be always working. That is the very last point where your node will be looking for the other addresses. If they will stop working and the other nodes will work, the network will be still enabled. But if there will be no nodes and in the network, and those websites will be shut down, the network will be shut down too, because there will be no way to communicate, to find out any other nodes within the internet. Any of those nodes probably would like to mine the block, so they do the stuff we discussed before. They would like to calculate the hash number and publish it to the network, and the fastest one gets the reward. Then they spread the information about the network across to the another nodes, and you can consider that as a simple office that needs to calculate. So you need to have a lot of people that do the calculations on the paper and calculates this piece of this hash from the transactions, and they do the job. When they have prepared properly calculated hash number, they can just fax the piece of paper to the another offices. And the one who faxes it in the fastest takes the reward. So the first one. And basically that's how the blockchain works right now. And if you would like to know more details about it, please look at the links that I would put under the video, and see you next week.